As I was driving over here, I was musing on the rental car that I have and how amazing it is. You don't have to turn the lights on. It kind of knows that you need the lights on. It seems to kind of anticipate your every wish. And I was thinking, boy, it's amazing how far we've come. It's amazing how far we've come. Every year, these vehicles get better. The mileage gets better. They're safer. They have all of these neat inventions in them. And then I started thinking about Newt Gingrich and Romney and so on. I thought, well, how far have we come? And Fox News, and I'm sorry to say, even the New York Times. And then I say, you know, we really haven't come that far at all. We've come very, very far in some areas, and we haven't come far at all in other areas. My interest is principally in those areas where we have not made progress. And I know some people say to me, well, what a downer. You know, I want happy things. You know, I want 3 cups of tea, or I don't know if that's a happy story, actually. Now, he fell into disfavor anyway, but, you know, I think that we have to face up to problems. And the reason I think we have to face up to problems is if we don't face up to problems, they get worse. And I have people in my family who lived in other countries where very, very bad things happened, and where people came to take other people away. And there are people still living who can tell you their personal stories of that. And there are too many people in this country who've gotten very, very smug, and they think that politics is optional. They think that paying attention to what's going on or trying to do anything is optional. Or they say, well, what can one person do? And toward the end, we'll talk about that because, of course, everything in the world is done by one person trying to get other people involved, and eventually you have a whole bunch of persons. So I think one of the many great things about Occupy Wall Street is it's shown us that people can actually do something. We don't know where that's going to end, but we certainly know that it has begun. And I think that's very, very important. So I started Who, What, Why, and Who, What, Why is devoted to trying to dig deeper and trying to figure out what is going on and why. What went on in the past, what's going on now, what's likely to go on in the future. And so we're dedicated to what we call forensic journalism. Or you might say investigative journalism, but it's trying to dig deep for answers. And as you will read in my book, Family of Secrets, George W. Bush, who is much smarter than you think he is, remarked to an advisor, who then remarked to me, that he loved the idea of fooling people. And so one of the things he would do is he would fool the journalists by burying something in plain sight. He would give a little anecdote like that he's cheap. He would tell somebody it and then say, don't tell any reporters, knowing perfectly well they would tell a reporter because they want to get some attention. And then, of course, these stories would end up reflecting fine on him. So, for example, he leaked stories that he had tried marijuana. That way, nobody would ask, had he tried cocaine? Or not only had he tried cocaine, but as these rumors about whether he had dealt cocaine. And so all of these things are very, very carefully calculated. It's not that they're not true. It's that they're calculated for a particular kind of an effect. And so this is what passes for journalism now. There's almost no deep digging behind any of these kinds of things. And the reason I started Who, What, Why was because I saw in almost anything I looked at that there was more to the story. So here are just a few examples of recent stories we did. We just recently looked at, are you familiar with the Dominique Strauss-Kahn incident with the maid in the Sofitel in New York? One of our people just wrote an article raising some interesting questions about what really happened there and whether or not he was framed by the French security services as a way of removing him as a candidate for the presidency. Now, the American press immediately says, rubbish. That kind of thing could not possibly happen. And my answer is, read Family of Secrets, because the entire book is about how this has happened repeatedly in the history of this country, and it has been ignored, unknown to, or covered up by the media, who find it simply too scary to deal with. Throughout my career, people would always say to me, you know, I wouldn't do that story. I'd stay away from that. You know, that's a kind of an electrified third rail. That's only going to get you in trouble. And I'd say, yeah, but it's true. And they'd say, listen, you've got a good career going. I would stay away from that. And when I worked on Family of Secrets, I began this in 2004, worked on it for about 5 years. And I had no agenda there, just as with Who, What, Why, we don't have any agenda. We really just want to know what the story is. You know, maybe Strauss-Kahn was not framed, and maybe he was. We don't really know. We don't really care. We would just like to find out what the answer is, and then whatever the answer is, what that tells us that we need to know as we go forward. It's the same thing with any of these other stories. We did a story about a house in Sarasota, Florida. How many of you read that, about the 9/11 connection of that house? Not too many. Okay. They disappeared, right. I won't tell you the whole story, but basically, about 11 or 12 days before 9/11, a Saudi family living in a gated community in Sarasota, Florida, not far from where some of the hijackers trained to fly, disappeared. They left their cars in the driveway, everything in the house, everything exactly as it was, and they never came back.
Like it was half, the meals were half eaten?
Yeah, it was just like they took off fast. And I was intrigued by that. The original article ran in the Miami Herald, and they discovered that the FBI had swarmed the complex and had found connections between this family and 11 of the 19 hijackers. Now, you would think this would be one of the world's biggest stories because there's never been a story like that. We don't even know what we know anymore. Some people said to me, "Oh, I heard that story." I said, "You did?" "Yeah, Michael Moore had that in his movie." Well, no, he didn't have that in his movie. He had something else in his movie. And this is very, very important. And so we had a public relations person here in New Mexico volunteered to send that, well, there was that story, and then we looked into it further, and we found out that the people who owned the house were connected directly to one of the most powerful princes in the Saudi royal family, directly employed right under him. You know, is that a big story? And it came out on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, where the media was full of maudlin stories about, you know, families, missing people and so on, with no new information. We sent this press release out to all of the media, the New York Times, AP, Al Jazeera, Democracy Now!, Rachel Maddow, Keith Olbermann, and so on, and not a one of them covered this story. Nobody. Nobody. Now, you can ask them why they don't cover the story, but the reality is that this gets into this area which is immediately labeled very pejoratively as conspiracy theory. In other words, the notion that more than one person get together to do anything malign is absolutely unacceptable. And yet, of course, we have all of these cases of conspiracy with people being run through the courts and sent to jail. 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 people working together, rigging parking tickets and things on Wall Street and what have you. Murder conspiracies happening all the time where somebody gets together with a few people to rub out their spouse or what have you. So conspiracies are going on all the time. But when it comes to the large level, which is the health of our society, we're not supposed to talk about this. We're supposed to act like this doesn't exist, and we're supposed to profile, you know, Mitt Romney's frugality. So Family of Secrets began when I wondered, what's up with George W. Bush? How did this guy become president of the United States and the most powerful person in the world? Whatever you think of him, and perhaps some of you are great admirers of his, he's still, even his admirers would say, not the most likely person to match him up with people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Lincoln or, you know, even probably Millard Fillmore. And so this was odd to me, and I was looking at the campaign finance records for him, and they're this thick. I mean, they're hundreds or thousands of pages of names of people who gave great amounts of money to get him to the top. And I thought, well, what's that about? And what I found, it was about loyalty to his family and what his family represented to all of these people. And these people, I never heard of them. You never heard of most of these people. But these people they're the 1% of the 1%. Or to put it another way, they are a certain subset of people in this country who look at the world in a very different way than we do. And one of the many problems that I see with the so-called liberal wing of the media is that they act as if the only conflict in this country is between the left and the right, between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, between Obama and Newt Gingrich, and that is it. That is it. Nothing else exists. And so these huge moneyed centers, in Family of Secrets, I quote Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Shortly after he took office, he wrote, "The real power in this country is not in Washington. It resides in the great financial centers of our country." He was basically saying, I don't really run this place. Okay? And that is what I have learned more and more throughout my career, is that the way that decisions are made in this country is much more complex and opaque than the media would have you know. And so these things that we get all excited about every 4 years, these spectacles, these grand spectacles, bread and circuses, the horse race, whatever you want to call it, who's up and who's down in the polls and how many votes in each caucus and so on, that consume the entire bandwidth of the media, mean very, very little. Because first of all, most of those people aren't going to get into office. And then when they get into office, they're not necessarily going to do what they said they were going to do. And even if they want to do what they said they were going to do, they're not able to do it. If they don't know that, most of them know that already before they get in. If they don't know that before they get in, they find out real fast afterwards. John F. Kennedy found that out. Jimmy Carter found that out. Quite a few presidents found that out. Eisenhower found that out. Truman found that out. Family of Secrets is a book about this dynamic, about how presidents don't really run the country and that we don't really understand who does and how these decisions are made. And so what I did was I did investigative research into the background of the Bush family, the people behind them, and then it began to grow and grow and grow. And then I was going this way and that way and that way, and pretty soon I was going down rabbit holes into whole new levels of consciousness, at least for me. Just to give you a few quick examples, I discovered that they had secrets, that the Bush family had tremendous secrets, and that these secrets were really secrets of the whole American society, that George W. Bush was not really who we thought he was. He was in some respects, in the visible ways, had problems articulating things and so forth, but in many other ways was quite different, much more clever and calculating. His father was not this harmless, very likable patrician. He was a cold-blooded, ruthless individual who not only was CIA director for a single year, brought in as an outsider, a clean-cut congressman to clean up the image of the agency. He was brought in as part of a cover-up, and what I discovered was that he was already in the agency. He had been in the agency for decades before that. All of his work as a congressman, as a diplomat, as an oil man, cover for intelligence operations that were completely unknown to the American people and to the American Congress. And this is what I'm talking about, getting to the deeper levels. When I speak to people who are from other countries, say Russia or Chile or Argentina or wherever it is, they nod knowingly because they're familiar with this. Putin is an open book. He spent his whole life in that stuff. But people are surprised to hear that our equivalent, George H.W. Bush, was just like Putin, that he was in that agency. And then I began to look at the agency itself. What is it? Where did it come from? Who created it and why? And I discovered I didn't know anything about that. And then I discovered I didn't know much really about the FBI or the Secret Service or any of these entities. Really did not understand what they were. The Justice Department, somebody, when you go to Washington, it's usually over drinks people say things to you. One fellow said to me, you know what the most important agency in the federal government is? And I said, what? He said, well, maybe the Pentagon. After that, it's the Justice Department. And he said, that is what the big donors give money to the presidential candidates for, because they want to influence the choice of the Attorney General, because if the Attorney General doesn't come after them, they're home free. And that's why all of these practices that cause us problems, if you lost a lot of money in the collapse of the market, this will relate to you. A lot of this malfeasance, a lot of these things that should be criminal and aren't criminal because those people won't declare them to be criminal. And that is how that works. And we just don't know this stuff, and we don't get this in the media. And so what Family of Secrets is about is it's an effort to say, here is a real presidential history, not these books that get so much publicity. And by the way, we couldn't get on any of the big shows. And this is, despite my credentials as a relatively mainstream journalist my entire career, it's despite a book that's very carefully written and documented with 60 or so pages of footnotes. Everybody went silent. We sent an advance copy to one of the country's most prominent newspapers. They requested it particularly. They were excited because there's so many bad books out about the Bushes, and they thought, well, this one will be interesting. And then it was complete silence. They didn't pan it. They just, not a word, not a word. Bill Maher has my book, has not invited me on. I think these people are aware of the fact that they hang by a slender reed. Bill Maher lost his show, you may remember, when he was originally on Comedy Central. Now he's back on HBO. Bad things happen to people who go too far.